quite a lot to cover today, some of which might seem rather bits and pieces. And the reason for that is that the last meeting we had in Croydon, which was a face-to-face meeting with CQC there, unfortunately the day was marred by a tragic event in Croydon where a young woman was stabbed to death. So the traffic was hopeless and a lot of people couldn't get there. So there were a couple of questions asked of CQC, which he took away. Duncan Patterson, the inspector, took away. And I will go through those questions and also go through the answers. And if people have questions about CQC inspections, then if you get them to us, if you can't get your own inspector to answer them, we meet with CQC quite regularly, and we will get them answered for you. And in fact, Dudley and I met with Alison Murray last evening as a precursor to the CQC annual State of Care report, which is coming out this Friday. And we'll have a copy of that on Thursday night, and we will put it on the website on Friday. And there's a lot of reports coming out at the moment as well. You will have seen the one from CQC, from Skills for Care, with some very useful information. Okay, the first question that was asked of CQC was, can a rating be changed without an inspection taking place? Now, the thinking in the room was that at the moment an inspection is required, but in fact, a rating can be changed at times other than an inspection, which will give the whole process a lot more flexibility. And that's part of the new inspection regime. Now, the inspection regime is rolling out in the south and the east of England, and will be coming into to London probably next year. But frankly, if you're concerned about inspections, either get someone like Fulcrum to do a mock inspection for you. Make sure you keep your PIR up to date, but there should be no concern. As an organisation, you should be ready for an inspection at any time, really. A second question.
Can I add very quickly, Peter?
You can.
I think one of the concerns is everyone is focused on the new framework coming in, one framework from CQC. I think what they've said, until it's rolled out and it's official, please continue as if nothing has changed, because focusing on what is going to happen isn't going to change what's going to happen presently. And so it's still the same format as before. So please, please, please don't get your head turned on what's going to happen, what's going to change. Please deal with what's in front of you, please.
Yeah. And again, if you've got queries, ask. And most of you will have the contact details for your CQC inspector. So talk to them. And if you can't get through to them, talk to us and we'll find an answer for you. May not be immediate, but please don't leave it to the last minute. The second question, and this has come up quite often, was how often should a social care provider get feedback from the stakeholders they work with, such as residents, families, staff, professionals, etc.? The answer was there isn't a set time period, but it will vary between providers, and providers will need to work out a system that best fits their service, taking into consideration the points made. There's also a need for variety of routes to get feedback from those you're working with. So it's not just as if it's coming from one point. And many providers now use an independent source so that it's not seen as a biased report. There are several organizations that do it. It works very well. And many providers only survey their clients or the residents. They don't do their own staff and they don't do the stakeholders. Those are equally important. And I appreciate it is difficult sometimes to get your service users or your clients to complete a survey, but you should make those available in a number of forms, so they can have in writing, by email, or verbal, or some people even use picture type schematic ones, you need to get a reasonable response. A reasonable response is probably going to be something like 70%. Getting 10 or 20% is not really seen as a reasonable response.
Can I also add in something as well, Peter, on the back end of it? I think a lot of the time we see Peter will talk about why we're doing things, but also if we think about things like audits, compliance, this all really helps to evidence a lot of the good work that you're doing. I think that is really imperative with CQC. If you haven't, it's a famous line, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. So if we haven't got, for example, feedback, how will you know to improve your service? How do you know your audits are not in place to actually know what went wrong and what you can change? So also doing it just for yourself, but also it helps to add towards when it comes to an inspection as well.
Yeah. And you can compare the results year on year. And I actually think that many organizations, social organizations, miss a trick because they don't survey their staff. And if they do survey their staff, many of them don't take a lot of notice. And it just nudges on to a point that we hear from CQC and we hear from local authority quality monitoring teams. Two of the worst things, the worst done things in social care providers are supervisions and appraisals. And that comes up time and time again. Supervisions are incredibly important and should be done properly with notice, not when you happen to pass somebody in the corridor. They are important. It makes a big difference to maintaining your staff, to retaining your staff, and also keeping quality going. And I'm pretty sure that Ali or Dudley will be able to help, as we all can, with supervisions. And if there's a demand, then we can do an event about that sort of area.
And Peter, I would add, Ali will probably, when she does speak, tell us a bit more about supervisions. But I think also as well, supervisions were used to be very boring about just how you're doing, what's up to date. But supervisions can work as, for example, looking at your staff's well-being, obviously their future, CPD, and setting really goals and tasks, and also finding about your own service as well. So the actual supervision can now add to have more than just your staff's progress in your workplace, but actually can add to so many more things as well.
And when you do a supervision with people or feedback, these are two-way, so that should you as a manager or an owner or both be criticised for your staff, this is not an excuse to sack them. You have to take the criticism on board because it's a two-way process. Anyway, the third question, which we've partly covered, when will providers actually be inspected under the new regime? So how much notice will they have? Again, there isn't anything prescriptive, is the response from CQC. Providers can have some idea depending on where they are in terms of recent inspections. This is important. For example, if they have not had an inspection for a long time, that will increase the chance that they will do an inspection. Similarly, a number of new providers may not have had an inspection, and they will likely have an inspection in the new system because we don't have any inspection evidence at the present. For an established provider with, say, a good rating and no real concerns, an inspection will be less likely. All will depend on any concerns or evidence of risk, which may be a trigger for an inspection. In terms of notice, I think much the same. Often announced, but we do announce some inspections. Often unannounced, but we do announce some inspections to make sure the people we want to see are there, and so on. That's a pretty standard set of information. Just a point to add, which Dudley may well have been going to cover in that sense anyway, but if you never have any safeguarding alerts or complaints, that is not necessarily a good thing, because everybody has safeguarding alerts or complaints. So if you don't have any, CQC are going to be very interested in how you've managed to survive with neither of them ever coming up. And the general feeling is that if there's something comes along in your workplace that could be deemed to be safeguarding, report it first, even if it's a false alarm. Better to be safe than sorry. And if you report it to safeguarding, the local safeguarding authority board, also contact CQC, because some safeguarding boards will automatically contact CQC, some won't. So it is best for you to contact both of them. And I can see that Dudley is itching to come in.
No, I was actually going to share, because I know there is this whole notion that if people do have safeguardings and elements like that, people feel quite nervous. What I would say as well, for those who haven't had any form of near misses or safeguarding concerns, I think the notion is just like mock inspections do. For example, we do fire drills, actually set up a scenario of what would happen if something went wrong and how you would cope. It actually puts you ahead to show that CQC that you are trying to have a look at things that may happen or could happen and what you would do if something had changed or a scenario. So we know we have fire drills, but you can also do this with near misses or certain scenarios, which helps your service as well. So rather than necessarily doing a full mock inspection, you can actually take on a situation or a scenario that occurs and how you would cope as well. It's good for your service, and it's good for evidencing of what you can do as well. Rather than waiting for something to happen, you actually can create that as well. So try and be proactive, because if we're looking at outstanding organizations, a lot of them are proactive and a lot of things they're trying to do. So please do look at that as well. It's well within your power as well.
May I just offer a suggestion on that? Sorry, I had to nip off and get a tissue, so I didn't hear all of what you said, Dudley, but I would say that one of the things I used to do as a home manager was exactly that. If a near miss happened, I then would take it into a staff meeting, and we would all have a feed in as to how we would have dealt with that in the future. We recorded that, and it was one of our key points of refreshing learning that we could show of evidence for CQC. I would say that it is the near misses are probably the most valuable training points that we ever had, and it did help no end to predict things, but more importantly it helped the team to see that there's no such thing as failures, there's only ever getting better. And that is a really positive place to come from, because people are often nervous of mentioning safeguarding incidents if you're not on shift to see them at the time. But if they become embedded as part of the natural feedback and development of a service, it's something people actually embrace, because people then come forward and go, I saw this, what would we do about this next time? So treat it as a positive, keep the compliments. Don't always forget the compliments. We keep the complaints, but we don't keep the compliments. I think a compliments note is a really, really important thing. And that goes sometimes for all members of your teams. Sometimes as managers, it's nice to keep a compliment too.
Yeah, and I add something even extra for another. We're giving all these gems at the moment. Actually, when you do this, actually, you can a staff member can be the person who's responsible, become a champion actually in that area. So, if this happens for whatever reason, be it falls or whatever area, you can actually have a member of staff who's dedicated to that. That helps with their CPD, continued professional development, and also shows that as an organization, as a manager, can't do everything, but you're actually sharing and delegating, which is one of the great things about leadership, which I'm sure Ali will talk about as well going forward.
And I think it's also very important when you have things like staff meetings, evidence those staff meetings, because when you have a visit from CQC or they contact you, and the same with local authority monitoring teams, it's all very well saying we did this and we did that, but they weren't there at the time. They need to see that you have done that. They need to be evidenced, and either just record them in a meeting book and sign it off, or just simply record them with a camera, and then you can show that as evidence. And again, you've got repetition. If the same incident crops up with a member of staff, you can go back to them again and ask them what's what. I see that Ian Buchan has joined us.
Very, thank you very much, Ian, for joining us.
He seems to have disappeared again.
Oh dear. Well, Peter and I were having a conversation just before we started, and we know when we talk about the most popular people in the room, when we talk about CQC, sometimes people are a bit nervous, and then commissioners as well. So we're not sure who's more popular at the moment, commissioners or CQC. But I would say is we've got a commissioner in here, which is really fantastic because that doesn't often happen. Ian, I think when he returns, is a commissioner for South East London, and he'll be sharing a lot of information today. Also, he'll be available for questions as well. If you do have any questions, please, some have sent us questions already. The other thing you can do is put them in the chat as well, and we will try and get Ian to answer them if he can today, or if Ian can't answer the questions, he will probably go away and actually come back with some of the answers as well. And I see Ian's back with us, and I know technology is a wonderful thing, but also as well, it can play up as well. But thanks very much, Ian, for coming back and kindly sharing your time and giving us your time. And I think the floor is yours now. I'm not sure, if, Peter, there are any slides to add in. And Ian, thank you very much for coming.
Good morning, Ian. Good to see you. Do you have any slides, Ian, or?
No, I've been boring, and I'm not going to bore you with a slide deck as you would normally get. So I'm just going to come and talk a bit about getting paid. That's my starting point. My apologies, I had some problems. I couldn't hear you previously. I could see you all looking lovely, but I couldn't hear anybody. So hence needing to go out and work out what my technical.
Okay, Ian, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, I think my name's Ian Buchan. I work for the South East London Directors of Adult Social Care, and I support them in coordinating things across South East London. I also come from a commissioning background, so I'm one of those very evil people that does all the procurement things, and you will have cursed on many an occasion when completing a procurement exercise, because I would have set the questions and the scoring. So should I apologise? I probably should apologise, because it is quite a hideous process. So that's my background. And what I thought I'd start with is just understanding some basics around getting paid. And I think for me, the starting point of getting paid really needs to go back to your contract and your specification, and be really clear about what it says in there about how the payment system will work. Because we each have very different systems in local authorities. No two local authorities are identical. And I should apologise for that, because that is a complete pain for providers who work across several local authorities. So it's really important to understand what your payment mechanism is and how that works. And that will be in your contract or in your specification. If it's not clear, you need to flag that up. And sometimes we write things in local authorities which make complete and absolute sense to us, but mean nothing to the world outside of our civic offices. So if there is stuff in there that's written, then please ask and challenge it and check it out, because I think it's really important that you understand the process, and therefore you understand what you need to do to work within that process, and where the difficulties may be for you. I think for me, the other key thing you need to understand is when you're being asked to do a package of care or a placement, you have clear, appropriate evidence that aligns to your specification. We have systems in place in local authorities to control spend. So there may be a delightful social worker who you get on very well with and have spoken to a number of times, who's asked you to change something and increase something. Unless that's been authorised, that isn't technically approved. So there will be paperwork which you'll be used to getting, formal paperwork that you need to have in place so you know what you're being asked to provide, and make sure it reflects what you think you need to provide. So if it doesn't align with what you've had discussions with the brokerage team on, then you need to go back and you need to resolve those issues as early on as possible. And sometimes that's just a sort of administrative error, human error, but it's really important to get that information that you're commencing the placement on or starting the package of care on clear and correct. and that's all in place. I think the other key element for me around getting paid on time is knowing your local system and knowing who the key people are. In the system I've previously worked in local authorities in London, brokerage and your payments team are the two key points that you need to sort of engage with and flag things with when they're not sorted out. Also, if you're not going to meet deadlines that are set, so some local authorities will set a deadline for invoices or submission of electrical monitoring data. You're not going to make those deadlines. You need to let them know and work out how you're going to do that and when you will next get paid if they're going to be late. So having those relationships with the brokerage team and the payments team can be really critical. And if necessary, then you can also pull in your QA person or your commissioning manager, however the structure works in the local authority you're working with, to help negotiate and arbitrate for you. In my experience, when things are not being paid, sometimes it's simply a miscommunication between a local authority and a provider, and maybe them speaking the same language, but it meaning slightly different things to the different parties. And certainly as a commissioner, arbitrating in that is normally trying to work out what is really going on and how do we resolve it and what do we need, and setting that in very simplistic terms so everybody knows. Because sometimes the one thing I would apologise in local authorities for is we do have a great ability to complicate matters. So I think for me, it's about really understanding it, getting all set out in simple terms, making sure the format of your data is correct and that it works, and knowing who your key people are so you can have conversations with them about how to address any particular issues. I think for me, that's the sort of potted version of managing payments. And it does start at the very beginning of understanding the process that's set out within your contract or your specification, through to the sort of practicalities of that being operated on a day-to-day basis. So I'll stop there because I can't answer any borough-specific questions because actually I don't know all the borough systems. So and that would make me a very valuable commodity if I did. And if I understood them, I'd be even more valuable. But that's just my sort of potted history, or potted version of understanding payments and working them through. My one thing that I would emphasize in this is you really need to, if you're having difficulties, flag it as soon as possible. Don't wait for it. Flag it and try to resolve it as soon as possible, because actually going back retrospectively can be very difficult and painful for everybody and takes enormous amounts of time, of both your time as a provider and both the local authority's time, which will delay you actually getting paid.
Thank you, Ian. I'm not sure if you want to take some questions now or move on to another area. What would be your preference?
I don't mind taking some questions.
Okay. Well, we've got a commissioner at hand, and we talked about payments and getting paid. I can't tell you how often I've been in a room where people have complained about being paid and the reasons behind it. You have a commissioner here, so I think it's a wonderful time to ask a question. If you don't feel comfortable asking Ian directly, you can put it in the chat as well. Even if you want to do it directly to either Peter or I or Ali, you can do. I'm quite worried sometimes when we have CQC or a commissioner in the room and everyone goes silent, but when they leave, 101 questions happen. So I do know Ian, he's a very nice man. So please do feel free to ask any questions.
And I think on the point that Ian makes wisely about borough specifics, if you have got borough specific questions, then we may know somebody. But again, to just iterate the point that Ian made, make sure you have the right contacts at the right borough. And some organisations seem to be outsourcing their payment schemes now, and so it may be a fault with the outsourcing agent rather than the borough. But let the borough know, because they should have direct contact with the outsourced agent, be it BT or whoever it is that's doing the payments.
Yeah, I do. There is a question in the chat from Jean. Does reporting about not getting paid to CQC help? Very bluntly, Jean, no. What I would say, oh, good, over 2 years. What I would say, Jean, is you need to make a formal complaint. I mean, I will defend local authorities as much as is perfectly reasonable to, but actually you need to escalate it. So that's why it's really important to know your key contacts are. And once you've exhausted that and they've not been able to assist, you need to escalate it. There's nothing wrong with escalating, and we have performance targets around making payments in local authorities and around doing that. So do escalate it and be really and if you can't, well, if it's been escalated, then what I would suggest you do is you then either look at the local government ombudsman and you raise it with members of councillors, so the political members of the local authority. And there will be, in each local authority, there will be a lead for adult social care. Every borough has them. So you can either flag it with them or the leader of the council. You know, I would hope through discussion and negotiation with the commissioner and the team that you're able to work through and resolve issues so they don't drag on over that sort of length of time. But again, I think whenever you're having meetings with local authorities and you're agreeing to undertake particular tasks to resolve a situation, I think it's really important then that you set timescales for who's going to do what activity, etc. And that's really important. Would it affect relationships and commissioning? I'll give you a social worker's answer to that, Jean. I think, like anything, if you attack the individual, then that may well cause you some issues around relationship. But at the end of the day, if it's individuals who are holding that up, then I think you do need to flag it. And actually, you know, that's perfectly reasonable. I would always say that actually try to focus on the detail rather than on the person. But let's face it, if you're struggling after 2 years, then I'm not sure the relationship is being that helpful to you in the first place. And at the end of the day, as a commissioner, I don't think I'm completely alone in the fact that as a commissioner, if I've got something wrong, I'm really happy to try to put it right. If I don't understand where I've got it wrong, that may take me longer, I can't deny. But my ultimate aim is to work with my providers, because without you, I can't deliver my statutory responsibilities. So it's really important that I have you on side and that we work together, because actually I'm not good. I don't suppose I'd be very good at wandering around parts of South East London delivering personal care. And you have that expertise and I don't.
Thanks for that, Ian. We've got a question, a hand raised from Claire. I think Claire wants to ask you a question. So yeah, there you go, Claire. Thank
you. It's not so much a question, it's just from my experience. So I currently work for local authority, Croydon, and I'm the service manager for our extra care service. I used to work in brokerage, and I know that in Croydon we do have a lot of billing issues. I wonder whether it's worth going directly to brokerage because having worked in brokerage myself, I know that if something's not set up correctly on the system, and it could literally be ticking a box, that then doesn't feed through to the billing team, and that often causes billing issues. So the billing team can't do anything because they're not aware of that package of care or that service, because something hasn't been done quite right by brokerage. So it might be worth first going back to brokerage, and then if they confirm they've done everything they should have, it then needs to go to commissioning or the billing team. That's just my experience.
I think that's a really good point, Claire, and that's why I say that getting that information at the start of a package of care or a placement and making sure that that paperwork is correct is important. And brokerage are the starting point for these things in most local authorities, so that's really important. And that's why it's important to tackle it as early as possible. And I think when you first spot it, it's really important to pick it up at that point and try to resolve it, and not and therefore it not drag on for a very long time.
Can I just ask a question on the back of what you've just been speaking about, Ian? We know there's a huge turnaround within local authorities of staff, and sometimes you start dealing with someone, you build up a relationship, and then that person then leaves, and you find yourself starting all over again, them not understanding, for example, the whole process when you started and working with them. So how do we get around the changeover of staff, and how can you support those the providers with that?
There are changes in stuff, and some local authorities may be more affected by that than others. In reality, Dudley, certainly the team that I worked with in Bexley, they've been there for such a long time. I think they're rooted to the ground. But the thing is, if there is staff changes, and I think it's always important to look at within teams, responsibilities for activities shift. So it's always useful to have a sort of relationship with more than one person. But I also think it's about maintaining relationships. So whether it's, relationships shouldn't always be built on just one person, even though there are sometimes it is, because it's, there's one commissioner, lead commissioner, and therefore you have a relationship with them until they decide to leave. I think it's just about maintaining contact with the local authority regularly, linking in with their provider forums as and when appropriate, and thinking there's always has to be a balance. I have been a provider, and admittedly, either I was in the voluntary sector and I managed in-house services, a bit like Claire. And for me, the key thing about it was, if I didn't have a lot of activity with the local authority, why would I keep attending all their provider forums? So I think you just need to make a bit of a balancing act about your attendance and maintaining relationships, because actually it may seem like a large investment of your time, but actually it may also assist you in resolving any issues quite quickly, because you know people, and you know who to talk to. So I'm not sure I've answered your question really, Dudley. But
No, I think it's great. No, I think it's great. I think one of the things, the same thing you get some of inspectors. How well do you know your inspectors? How well do you know your commissioners? And understanding them and having relationships is really key. So thanks for sharing that with us, Ian. There was another question in the chat.
I've looked at that one in the chat. Oh. If a framework is closed, now frameworks open and close. Frameworks are not an open process. A DPS, or a dynamic purchasing system, is the one that you can join throughout its lifetime. A framework is part of a tender process. You get on the framework or you don't get on the framework, and then unless they've got a crisis, they will only use framework providers until they go out, that framework goes out of date and they need to retender again. So how does a provider begin to get packages in the first place? I'd have to say that's really difficult with some of the ways that local authorities commission, particularly with the boroughs that operate very strictly provider frameworks. or that they have lead providers and you need to have a relationship with the lead provider to get subcontracted work. So my answer to that is it's difficult, and our procurement processes don't make it easy, because our procurement processes often set we look at your turnover, and you have to have a certain level of turnover to meet a contractual value. So we would need to see that if we set a contractual value at 100 grand for a contract for a year, different boroughs will set a turnover value on your current activity to show that you are able to meet that and manage that £100,000 a year contract. So there are different financial rules in different boroughs, and it may be useful to understand that first of all when you're applying, because the other big issue for smaller providers when they're applying for block contracts or contracts with a contractual value is that their turnover isn't enough, because they're small new providers and they haven't built up a level of activity to enable them to bid for some of those things. So understanding the framework, the financial framework that your local authority works within is really important. I can't remember the different models, but some will set a model which says you have to already be delivering at least 50% of the contractual value. Others will be different. Frameworks often don't set a value because there's no guarantee of activity on the framework or a dynamic purchasing system. So I suppose, Emmanuel, my difficulty in answering your question is there's no easy answer, and it really relates to that local authority. There are a range of procurement rules that people like my good self and my brokerage colleagues have to abide by. And to get around those rules, we have to have a particular range of reasons. Now, in my experience, the only time I've recently got around those rules, and I say recently, over the last 10 years, the only way I've got around those rules and taken on providers that haven't gone through a formal procurement process is one, during COVID, because with staff getting COVID and therefore the capacity being available meant in one authority we needed to take on some additional capacity to meet the demand, and we went for direct appointments, but that had to be approved. And the other is during an emergency situation where I needed approval from the lead member to transfer a contract to a provider who hadn't gone through a formal process. So they are unusual. So it's really about, again, it's about relationship, knowing your local borough, looking at opportunities of working with other providers, and seeing what they can offer you. But sometimes it's the procurement rules which we work within that are the struggle and the difficulty. But I would always register on the Due North Contracts portal in London.
Thanks for that. I think there's a follow-up question, and I think it's probably everyone wants to ask the question openly, but I think it's there from Mary Jo's.
Oh, right. Oh, now Marie Jo's. How can I answer that one? Let me give you one sense of hope. I'm old enough to have been around when a number of the larger providers in London started. And I've seen other providers come on since then. And they all started from being very small and new providers being led by one or two individuals. So I'm hopeful that actually it can happen. I think for me, it's about really finding out about the local authorities that are accessible to you and about what their systems are, and deciding whether there's opportunities. I think the other bit for me is thinking about your locality and what your self-funder market might also be available to you to help you. And there's, we don't have much detail on self-funder activity in home care particularly. We know that on average in England, the self-funder market purchases about 45% of care home beds, and that goes up to over 80% or for some homes it's 100%, but in some areas it can go up as high as 60 to 70%. So if I think about my Southeast London patch, if you look at places like Bromley, which have a very high level of homeowner and assets amongst their older population, you can see that actually care homes, there is a market for private care home activity. There's also a market for private home care activity. That's the same, I would say, in Bexley. In other areas where maybe property is high, you have to look at where the property comes from in the over 65. So it might be high, and there might be high self-funders in Lambeth for residential and nursing care, but they may not be asset rich. They may be asset rich, but not income rich. And so you need to think about your mix of your local authority commissioning model, which will change every 3 to 4 years as they re-procure, or 5 years as some boroughs are doing now, and look at your self-funder market. My tip to understanding your self-funder market is to look at the GLA data store. They do some really good information in the GLA data store about populations. And they will tell you how many homeowners live in particular boroughs. They'll give you ideas of income, etc. And you can start to use that data to think about where's your target audience for your business. And the other source of information is something called POPPI, POPPI, which again is a data source which sets out levels, and you can interrogate it and look at various bits of information around home ownership, levels of disability, and you can slice it by looking at different age groups, so you get a sense of the demographics and the impact on local areas, on local boroughs of health stuff, and people who may have a need with 2 or more personal care tasks, for instance. So you can help you focus the areas that you might want to work in. To be perfectly honest, I'm sure half a brain and a good wander around your patch would tell you whether there's affluence there, but these other data sources may help you look at some of your target audiences as well.
I think if I could just add from experience of talking to a lot of particularly DCAs of recent startup history, many DCAs start without doing a great deal of market research. They don't have an exit plan of how to get out if something goes wrong. And from a commissioner's viewpoint, or the viewpoint of, say, a potential private client looking at them, they have very poor websites, which are misspelt. They use the same pictures as every other website, badly displayed, simply cut and pasted from somebody else's website. So they haven't made a huge amount of effort. And things like basic telephone answering, when people call them, it goes straight to answering machine, or doesn't get picked up at all. They don't respond to emails. So I think from a commissioner's viewpoint, having spoken to a few about this, they do despair because they're getting emails day in, day out from, the next great dom care provider. And they really have nothing to offer. And in some areas of London and some parts of the country, there is a huge excess of particularly dom care support or dom care supply to the actual marketplace. So there is going to be some fallout, sadly. And sometimes, I mean, Dudley and I have looked at this, we've talked with people. People need to be a bit more cute before they put their money into it and start up, frankly.
I mean, thanks for that, Peter. I think I'll add in with a few extra bits as well. I think sometimes you can go into a building and you can see 10 DCAs in one building itself, and they're all vying to try and get the same package in that local area. I think the concern is, as Ian mentioned, it's turnover. I think we have to look at it, whereas the commissioners are going to choose one of 12, and it's a very small number considering the amount of those that apply. It's actually thinking about working with others, joining together, looking beyond that. I think this is something where we can think about in a lot more from a business angle, as opposed to just looking at it about personal gains. So I think there's some great DCAs out there who unfortunately may not access some of these tenders because of their size and turnover. So look at it as a business and organization. There's a great deal of great organizations who can come together, and actually, as together, their turnover will match the requirements, and actually trying to deliver the care isn't an issue. A lot of the time it's more the other end. But I think thanks for some of that great information and insight, Ian.
I mean, I think the other thing for me, having managed home care for several chunks of my working life, we have a slight split personality in local authorities. We have a moan at you if we think you haven't turned up on time and done A, B, and C. But we also have an expectation that you'll take anything we throw at you. Now, as an ex-manager of in-house services, home care is delivered based on the logistical thing of getting one person into somebody's home or two people into someone's home. So actually, taking work spread thinly across an area is not an answer to some of the quality and consistency issues that you want to deliver. And actually really thinking through when you're starting up, targeting an area where you're going to get activity, so you can keep your carers in they're not running ragged, they're not running all over the place, and that actually they get to know the area and they can add value by knowing what's around and being able to suggest things to people, and linking them with the local church group that does a coffee morning, or the local tenants association that does a bingo afternoon or some other activity. I think it's about how you also add value to the people you work with, and I think that always comes from working in a targeted area. And I accept that in local authorities we don't always see it that way. I'm always quite happy when a provider says to me no, because I think actually that provider then knows their limits. They're not constantly saying yes to please me. They're saying I can't do this because of these reasons. I'm much happier about that because I trust that provider more than the provider who constantly takes stuff, but then we have problems, because actually we overstretch ourselves as providers. And we forget that actually our carers are human beings and the poor darlings are being run ragged. And I've certainly, when I've managed services, have despaired at some of the rotas that some of my supervisors have set up for the carers, because I think, blimey, they do more steps in a day than I do in a month. And is that fair and reasonable on them? So I think, and how do then people deliver a good quality service if they're always feeling they've rushed in and they've got to rush off, and actually most of their energy was exerted on a hike from their last job. So I think, there is a bit of a balancing act to have around some of those things.
And I think there's a good point there. I know a dom care provider, and I've spoken to their staff, and they seem to be quite a happy bunch of people as far as dom care staff go. And I looked at the rotas and I thought some of these folks are walking an awfully long way. And two of the ladies there said, yes, but it's a really good operator to work for, because they provide us with good outdoor clothes and comfy shoes, so we don't mind walking. That's partly why we came here. And I said to the owner, she said, well, I've done exactly the same thing when I was starting out. I've plodded the mean streets of West London. And she said, 2 days in, I realized that I needed some better shoes. And I see staff coming in, and clearly their shoes are unsuitable. So I don't, they're good staff. I don't want to lose them. So I buy them a pair of shoes. It's cheaper than recruiting new staff.
Yeah.
There
is a question in the chat about being based in one authority and tendering for work in another. And maybe it's a business decision, Emmanuel, more than anything. You don't have to be based in the borough to tender. There may be conditions on a tender arrangement that says you will need to be based in the borough if you win, but you need to look at that. Some frameworks don't set that out. Patch-based providers, when they're looking at a patch-based system, or a lead provider, will set that out. But then you need to make a decision about whether the value of the contract actually makes that work for you or not. I do know that there are providers across London that provide services to boroughs outside of their home or host borough, and do so perfectly well. I think for me, as a commissioner, what I'd want to see when someone's based outside of a borough is how you're going to manage understanding the borough, how you're going to manage to support your workers if they're sort of at arm's length from you. And I can see some providers that I know that are not based in the borough that they deliver care into, or at least one of the boroughs that they deliver care into. And what they do is they have a point where they meet their carers twice a week. They have a supervisor who supervises that borough's activity, who spends most of their time there. They have a satellite office. On one of the providers has a satellite office, so they're based there, so they understand it, and they do all their recruitment locally. So it is possible. And I think it again comes back down to a business decision about the value of the contract and whether that would make it worthwhile for you. But I would certainly consider it.
Thanks for that, Ian. I think it's a very important question, because I think lots of people do apply for tenders outside of their own borough where they're based. And I think the question is always, can we apply for that? Because writing tenders or paying someone to assist you with the tenders can be costly. And there'll be no point in just applying if it meant that you couldn't get in there in the first place. So do look at the conditions behind it. I think it's really important. I'm going to jump in with a quick question as well, Ian. I think there's so much information that happens. How do providers get to find out about, for example, upcoming tenders, when it's going to happen, and also any information that comes from commissioners locally?
Well, there are a couple of devious things you can do, Dudley. Local authorities are constantly getting freedom of information requests. So have a little search on freedom of information requests. We have to publish them. So if someone asks us information, we normally publish that freedom of information request answer. And I can tell you the ones that I often get asked are what our rates of care are, and when we're likely to procure. So you can have a little rummage through that. If not, you can always do a freedom of information request to all the boroughs. You can just write the same request and change the borough. There is a system. If you look up freedom of information requests, there is a website that enables you to badge your local authorities with them. So that can be quite useful. But the one thing I would say is more sensible is to look at registering with the General Contracts Portal. But my one caveat to that is that you need to make sure that the boroughs that are convenient to you and that you would ideally want to work in use that. So it's always important to find out from them if they use that. So I get lots of, or when I worked in Bexley, I got lots of emails asking me how they knew about it, and I would direct them to the Due North Contracts portal because that's what Bexley uses. Other boroughs use different mechanisms, but it's important to register with those mechanisms because then they'll alert you. What they will also alert you to do is sometimes in local authorities when we're doing a large procurement or a procurement which is quite different to what we've done previously, we will do a briefing session. And the invite for that will go out on Due North because we need to do that on Due North. So we meet procurement rules and we don't just favour the providers that we currently work with, so that the information doesn't just go via our provider forums, that goes to a wider audience should others be interested. So there are two options there, but the easiest one is find out what system, procurement contracting system your local authority uses, register with it, and if you're being really sensible, then you can sort of plan ahead and do freedom of information requests to ask when they're likely to, when their contracts are up. Or actually, I've just occurred to myself that actually, if you have a look on the local authority's website, there is a contracts register. And we have to maintain that register legally. So there's a register of all the contracts the local authority have given out. And you'll find the Dom Care or the care home block contracts or whatever on there. And it will tell you their start date, their end date, and if there's any extensions, and you'll see who the current providers are as well. So you can get that information from the borough's contract register.
Thank you for that, Ian. Peter, I know we're looking at time, and I think there's probably so many questions we could ask you, Ian. So as well, respectively, thank you so much for actually sharing your information. Some gems, I'm sure a lot of people are scribbling down lots of the things you've said. And I think probably could be a lot more sort of questions that they could bombard you with. Peter, I'll pass it over to you.
I think there's just one point I would make before people rush off and sign up and start writing bids for tender opportunities. Read the paperwork, because I frequently get social care providers send a bid document to me and say, would I complete this for them? And I go, well, do you have any experience with autism? And they go, well, no, but I need some business and this is pretty local, so I thought I'd give it a go. That's not the way to do it. And it, you know, something, it might say something like the turnover required is at least £3 million a year. And so I said, well, what's your turnover? Well, it's about £1 million. So why are you going to apply for this? And there are a couple of organisations that look at tender opportunities. They then contact providers in the area and say, we will write a very good bid for you using our tremendous expertise, and that will cost you something around £5,000 plus VAT. I'm not saying that those organisations don't write good bids, but if you haven't got a hope in hell of getting through the process in the first instance, you might as well go to the top of the building and throw £5,000 in news notes into the air, because you're not going to get in, even with a gold-plated bid and the fact that you've got ISO and IIP and all the rest of it. If you don't tick the basic boxes, forget it. And there's a huge number of people wasting time and money signing up for contracts that they have no chance of getting through. And at the moment, the feedback we're getting from boroughs is they're getting huge numbers of bids. It's actually delaying the outcomes of some tender processes, because they just have bids coming from all over the place. And if you're looking for care staff, etc., then the situation is that staff will not generally go more than a couple of miles to get to their workplace. Back to, you know, dom care staff walking around, etc., etc. Just think through the process before you spend a pile of cash that you probably haven't really got, or you could use more wisely. Any final points, Ian, from you, your words of wisdom over many years?
I mean, in terms of writing bids, I've read many a bid, and I can tell you I do read every word of it. But the biggest thing for me in reading bids is when we spent some time setting out a vision. So the specification is really boring. And to be perfectly honest, if providers did everything in the specification, we'd have to pay 3 times more for the care. So we set these things out because we do. But we have a vision, and that will be imparted to you during either promotional stuff or in some of the documentations. Make sure you understand that vision and the key bits in it. I recently did a bid where we talked about providers being able to alter and negotiate changes in the care package directly with the service user based on issues that they raised and that were sensible. It would get signed off by the borough, but on a sort of, we'd look at 10 of them and we'd check 3 of them and sign them off. And there was nothing more irritating than reading bids which constantly said we would come back to the borough to ask their permission to change the package, when we were trying to say, actually, you're better at making these decisions than we are. We take a long time. We don't necessarily need to do a complete review or a reassessment for a change in the package for this sort of level of change. You're better placed to do that. We'll let you negotiate and organise that, because actually that makes sense. And then it was very frustrating when, despite the fact that had been our underlying message for some time, providers then didn't really take that on and didn't reflect it in their answers. So I think, and therefore you lose points, and the more points you lose means you don't get up the list to be appointed. And so it's really important that you look not just at the detail, but the flavour and the vision, and that you try to impart that as well in your bid. And I can tell you, getting a bid writer can be really helpful, and it can completely shoot you in the foot. The last tender that I read about over a whole week away from the office, I read about 19 applications, and I could tell the 3 of them were written by the same bid writer. So just be cautious of that, because actually it was beautifully written, but God, it was bland. Somebody else wrote a bid that was terribly written in terms of grammar, but God, you really understood that they cared about what they were doing, and that really came across. So there is a bit of a balance between having lovely shiny bids and also them having content which inspires you to feel that provider is going to deliver what you're looking for in the way that you want it delivered. So Mercy, I was halfway through writing a little reply to you. I'd go back to some of my bits around targeting your areas if you want to look at private clients. A website, good information, think about the area that you focus on if you're wanting to create a private market for you. And then think about how you market yourself in that area. Websites are lovely, but they're lovely for the families rather than the person who needs care. So websites are really important because, people like me look at them for our aging population or our aging relatives. But actually, that's not necessarily what the older person themselves looks at. So think about your marketing and think about whether you do things like leaflet drops in an area that seems to have the right affluence and need. And think through how you present yourself. And one of the things that I would say about presenting yourself is really think about the nuances of that person, what works for them. Think about the nuances of what would work for you if you needed care. Because that's really helpful to think through how you then reflect that in the assessment, and also how you get your carers to deliver it. When I was a home care manager many years ago, I can always remember being quite astounded why this particular client wasn't upset about her carer, because I was really not happy with the carer at all. The fact that the client really liked the carer and they got on, and she did little things like open her curtains, and on her last visit close her curtains in a particular way, always left her tea set out in a particular way. Those little nuances really meant something to her. The fact that the carer was meant to do some cleaning and tidying and housework in some of their visits, and the place looked like it had not seen a duster in many a year, the client didn't care about, because actually she liked the relationship with the carer and the fact that the carer responded to her little idiosyncrasies, which we all have. So just think about how, when you're doing private work, it's really important to think about that. It's also important to think about that when you're doing contracted work with a local authority, but it may have a much greater impact on your private work. So that's what I'd say about that.
Thanks for that, Ian. Thanks for that, Ian. I think there is so much gems that you've been, I think we could go on with so many other questions coming up. I think what we'll try and do is get some people can send us some questions, and if Ian's got time, he'll kindly answer as best as he can. I think also the caveat that we should have there, that is that Ian can only give you guidelines of what you can do, doesn't guarantee that you will get and win the tender, but actually doing the right things is the way forward. So I think it's really a key factor. I've spoken to Peter as well. We're going to try and getting some outstanding providers in both dom care and care homes, and actually to help give you guidance of maybe what they've done and how they've gone about it as well. So not just from the commissioner's side, but also from the provider's side as well. So I think it's always good to hear from what people have done and what they've, little nuances of or tricks or things that they may have helped to get them their tenders and successful tenders as well. So thank you very much, Ian, for really giving us a really comprehensive view, some gems, some places to look at as well. And I think the most important thing is how to get paid, because if anything, I think everyone here, if they're here for any one reason, is how to get paid. So thank you very much, Ian. We're constantly in touch with Ian, so please do share any sort of questions that you may want as well answered, and we'll try and get them to Ian and get back to you as soon as possible. Peter, I'm not sure if you want to share anything before.
Yes. Oh, yes, Ian, thank you very much. That was very useful. I mean, if we could some point get you to write those down, that we could then start a little guide. But the event today is recorded, so people can go back to those, so they can get those hints and tips. And I think we really must move on now to Ali Porteus before she dies of cold. And get to the Skills for Care update. Ali, over to you.
I don't really know what to say after that, Ian. That was really, really fascinating. And I feel I now want to throw my entire presentation out the window and focus on something completely different. And I'm going to, as a result of that. So, folks, we've got 62 people in the room. A few of us obviously are not necessarily delivering care, Ian and I particularly. But we've got quite a lot of experience of that. So first of all, Skills for Care, I assume you all know who we are. But what I will do is I am going to share my screen purely because it gives a little bit of a notage and I don't have to look at myself so much. So can you see that? Folks, give us a nod, Dudley. Can you see it?
I can see it. We've got the whole thing, so you might want to go on to...
I am trying to desperately, bear with me. So let me just have a little thought on that. It's for some reason my screen is taking up too much of space and I can't see what I'm doing here. Where is my slideshow? Oh dear. So I do apologize. But what I want to talk to you about is why I am here. So What is it that I do and why I do it? So that should now look a little bit better for you.
Well done.
Marvelous. Okay, so just to run through, those of you who don't know me, my name is Ali Porteus. I'm your new locality manager. I come with a little bit of background in the field, and just very quickly, I will run through the fact that I have specialist areas, most recently having worked specifically in recruitment and retention for Surrey Care Association and working directly with the ICB and with the local authority there. So my understanding of the process of recruitment and retention of staff is very much based on my own experiences as a homes manager and as a regional manager. So that made me wonder, what am I here for? What do I do for you? And I think what I would honestly say is, on the back of what Ian has says, is how can I help you do it better? And that's my role. So what I would like to sort of think about is some of the offers that we have, because what Ian has talked about is very much around how to get commissioning and how to show evidence of a well-led service, not only through writing your paperwork up and going into your contracts, etc., but also, more importantly, how to provide something that has an effective outcome for the people we serve. We've talked a lot about money, etc., but I would ask you always to think about that personalised and person-centred planning process. And I know Ian would agree with me that in the tenders that are put out, it is very much around the emotional presentation that you have for the business that you're going to offer. If you can show your outcomes are going to be positive to the person, flexible to the needs, and are well planned, you're going to get the business. Would you agree with that, Ian? I hope I get a nod. Thank you very much. That's great. So some of the things that we can offer you, we have over 1,500 offers, and I'm still trying to work out what those offers are. But certainly some of the big things on the table at the moment is we are looking at the leadership training. And to run any service now, it's not, when I started out, and I'm Ian, I think I'm probably older than you, so I started out many, many years ago. When I started out, we didn't talk about leadership and management. We just talked about developing a service. But now it is intrinsic that we are leaders of a service that is progressive and reflective. So we're offering some amazing courses at the moment in regards to leadership training. The big thing coming along the line is digital leadership. I'm going to touch upon that a little bit later. We've already talked about the changing requirements of CQC. We're also developing an awful lot more around recruiting for people's values. And that's part of how we look at our workforce planning. Now, I feel like I'm rushing through some of these, but please, if you could go back to the chat, I have put some direct links in that will take you to some of these key areas of development. So what I'd like you to do is to think about acquiring or inquiring within. We will guide you through the offers and the information that we have for you. We want to support your business to be the best it can. So if you want information about how to be good, contact me. And my information is available at all times. I post out on our WhatsApp. So please, please be aware of what can be there. If you can't find it, it's a huge website. I can help you find it. We've got 200 people in our organization who have so much knowledge that it's like having the cream on the milk for you. And if you want that information, come and collect it from us. So one of the key things we've talked about, and I am rushing through this because I am very, very conscious that you are time poor, shall we say. I want to talk to you about planning your business, because everything that you have spoken about today, whether we've been talking about looking at contracts, whether we've been talking about the skills of the staff to deliver those contracts, I would say the key thing for any of you is to think about how you are presenting your business and how you are able to provide the services that you're being commissioned to provide. I'd like you to really think carefully about your workforce plan. Do you have a plan of work? Do you have an understanding of how your business is going to develop over the next few months through the next year? We're in a very changing landscape in development and delivery, as well as political. And we've got to really be on top of how that's going to impact our business at some very, very tight financial points. I think some of the things that Peter and Dudley and Ian have talked about is very much about building a revenue base that ensures delivery can continue effectively. If you want to have a business that is here in 2, 3, 4 years' time, you need a plan to show how that business is going to support itself, who it's delivering services to, and how those services are going to be supported by a well-trained staff. And that means really thinking carefully about that workforce and knowing what's going on in your local area, thinking about how your business can meet the needs of the community you are delivering to. And now that can be outside of your own footprint, but I would say, and I think Ian would agree, that an awful lot of providers who are not getting contracts, they may be losing out to companies that are coming in from outside and making promises. Those promises may not be able to be fulfilled. So you need to make sure that when you talk to commissioners, that you are the ones who can show that in your local area, you've got people on the ground. And part of your well-led is making sure they've got the right footwear and the right coats. I love that idea. I would be having that as a primary point of not only recruitment, but also of well-led. I think about my team. And we all know when the snow comes, delivery is tough. But if you've got a good pair of boots, I've walked that walk myself, and it does make a very, very big difference. So thinking about how your workforce is going to be there. Is 80 to 90% of your business this workforce? They need to be trained. They need to be skilled. They need to be confident that they can come to you, and as we alluded to earlier, with things like near misses, safeguarding issues, deprivation of liberty issues. How are they managed within your team? Are your team strong enough to do that? And do you have a plan to support it? I'm going to touch very briefly on international recruitment because I think it's a really big challenge that we're coming up to at the moment. People are coming to this country, they're leaving their own homes. And I say this because as a woman, I am blown away by how anybody leaves their home and their family, comes to another country to work. If we don't fulfill the promises that we have when we bring people over here, then we're in the wrong. If you don't have the hours to support somebody who's coming from their own home to this country, and you aren't able to deliver the care that you say that you have on your books and that they're going to provide, then you're failing the business, you're failing the people who are coming over, and you're showing such lack of respect for people who are helping us out of a real challenging time at the moment. I feel passionately about this, that the people who are coming here are doing this country a huge favor, and we need to respect that. And that means putting that in your workforce plan. If you intend to recruit from abroad, how is that going to be supported? How are you ensuring the ethical side of things? Thank you, Dudley. How are you ensuring the ethical side of the business is there? But more importantly, how are you ensuring that the individuals coming over here have the skills and the diligence to ensure they enhance your workforce and meet the needs of the people that you're facing and you're supporting? So I would say your workforce plan, if you don't have it, then you don't have a business. Because without all this information sitting there, you can't make a judgment about how your finances are going to go. And I bring this back round to what Ian has said about checking your contracts. If you don't check your contracts, how do you know when you're going to be paid? And how can you do a business plan? And Peter and I have spoken at length about the importance of business and business development. And I say, as a businesswoman myself, I have my own business, and I do feel very strongly that I have to go and I have to show due diligence, and I have to show that my business is going to be supported through the next year. And not only for myself, but also for the people I'm working with. If I deliver a product, but I'm not going to be here in 6 months because I haven't thought through my business plan, then I've got a real challenge. So thinking about your plan, I want you to think really carefully about what are the values of your work. And I think this ties back into what Ian was saying about how people are seeing the essence of a contract. What are your values? Do you believe that in the center of all the care you deliver, the person who you're providing that support to is key to what you're feeling, who you're employing to? How is your business development clear? Is it understood by everybody in your business that in 6 months' time, you want to have 20% more of the business coming from a private sector, for example, in which case your whole team needs to understand that because they're going to be vital in promoting your business just as much as your social media is and just as much as your unique selling points are when you're recruiting staff. Your team is delivering the service that they are commissioned to do. I think that reflects very much on what you were saying, Ian, about don't take on jobs you can't do because you're actually failing the people we serve. It may be great from your point of view, but it's terrible from the people that you're providing the services to. But if you see a gap in the market frequently coming up, then train your staff. Give them the skills that will allow you to ask for that commission, to show evidence that you're the best person to support that situation. But when you're planning, think of your staff. And I want to give you an example. I'm a woman of a certain age. Some of you may be out there, and some of you may know that it's National Menopause Day today. Now, as my mother used to say, I used to pause for men, now it's the menopause for me. So what I want you to think about is what happens to women like me? We overheat, we have memory issues. Do you want me to do a double shift and handle your medication? Or are you going to put in your workforce plan consideration of my changing needs and give me a space to be able to talk to you as a manager and say, look, I'm really sorry, but today I'm having a very bad problem with this. Can it be considered when you're thinking about how I'm going to deliver care today? And that's what workforce planning is. It's understanding the nuances of the individual as much as understanding the nuances of your business. So for all those who've reached a certain age, happy Menopause Day. For all those who are going to consider it in the future, happy Menopause Day. And for all of us who are thinking, thank God it's a bit cooler now, happy Menopause Day. What I want you to think about is how do you do it? And we can help with this. We have a lot of different training facilities that you can get involved with, or webisodes and what have you, that will help you make a good, strong workforce plan. But to do it, you need to analyze where you're at. You need to understand your business as it stands today and tomorrow. You need to plan for tomorrow and the day after. You need to fulfill those plans in the way that you have said. And I allude back to what Dudley was saying about support when you go into supervisions. Supervisions should not be put off. They should not be, I'm really sorry, I'm busy today, we'll do it at another time, without ensuring that time is galvanized in your diary and you don't delay in the future, so that you can go back to CQC and you can say, the way I ensure well led is even if I miss a supervision, I've rescheduled it. Here's my diary to show that I value my communication. So doing what you say is important, but equally important is reviewing. Now, at the moment, we have a really good offer on in regards to workforce planning. And I heard a lovely thing yesterday that the seminar is there to assist. They will help you think, reflect, and get 20% of the plan done, but prepare you for the future with confidence. And I heard that beautifully yesterday from our business development people. So if you would like to know more about how to get workforce planning working for you, please contact me. I'm going to move through some of the other slides very quickly because we've got a few bits of information to pass over and time is running out. We have webinars to support. Again, you will receive these so you can follow up on them. We have blogs that will give you information, really key information from people who are at the face of things and who can help you understand some of the challenges that you're facing reflected in other people's experiences. We've got a deputy manager network. I don't know about you, my deputy managers have been vital to me in the past and we need to nurture them. They're the us of tomorrow. So think about how you're going to support your deputy managers as we move forward. We've also got this really great deal in regards to your renewal of a membership. Now, again, I'll send these PowerPoints out to you, but follow it up. Renewal is there and it won't cost you anything if you've got various things in place. So please look at the benefits of becoming a member. Training and development. I don't know whether many of you are up on the digital side of things, but this is the future. Digitalisation is really part of the people at the heart of care documents that are coming out. If you want to know more about how we can assist you, we do have some great overview pieces at the moment and our framework for training is very, very strong. So come to me or Dudley or Peter and they'll refer you to me and we can put you in touch with the training that you're needing there. Again, the framework is vitally important for all your staff to be digitally competent. There are various themes that sits on, and that gives you an idea of some of the areas of technology that are going to become more and more relevant to your staff team as you move forward. And bear in mind, CPD, Looking great for keeping your staff. The best way to keep your staff isn't to invest in them. And at the end of the day, many of us actually are much more technical than we like to think we are. We all have mobile phones. So thinking about some of our learning events as we come along, we've got digital learning modules available to you. And again, all of these courses, if they're on our WDF system, can be claimed back, and you can have the money back for these staff. They're a great quick win on your workforce development funding applications. And if you want to know more about workforce development, we've got a wonderful chap called David Vincent locally who any of us can put you in touch with. Managing your needs and developing your skills, equally important. Think about how you can become better at what you do and how we can help. Again, we've got some outstanding modules, and the link I put earlier into your text. I've got 1 minute, Dudley. I'm very aware I'm pushing along. Outstanding toolkit. I put the link into the chat. You're all talking about how to be the best you can. Let us help you be the best you can. Spoken about international recruitment. Again, we can help you with some of these things. I know this particular group is very involved in international recruitment, and we would want to support you to do that in an ethical way that shows respect for everybody involved in the process. Workforce intelligence. Claim your money back. Let us know what the workforce is doing. Let us be the influence on government that you need us to be to ensure that change happens the best way for the people that we provide services for. Again, great information on our website in regards to that. Little chat about Oliver McGowan. If any of you want to know more about Oliver McGowan, please come back to me. It's the training that is specific to people who work directly with people on the autistic spectrum. It's a really important changing mandatory training, and there's more mandatory training coming down the line. That needs to be supported for you. Finding the time and finding the opportunity to get your staff backfilled to do training is vitally important, but it does come down to you also being able to be refunded for some of these things. Finally, think about our bundles, think about the data set. I think I've now made it 1 minute over. I do apologize, Dudley. I feel I've whistle-stopped through that. Contact me. I'm worth contacting. I've got a lot of help I can give you. I've put my email address all over the place. I'm going to put it in the chat now, but I'd love to hear from you soon. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much, Ali. I think just for the record, we had Laura Anthony for many years, and now Ali's coming, and she's really wonderful. She's really experienced as well, and she really showcased so many of her different facets, but she's very knowledgeable at the sector and really can support and has knowledge as well. One thing I will say, Peter and I were lucky enough to speak to CQC yesterday evening, and they shared a lot of updates. One thing they did say is that their source of reference was Skills for Care. So if anyone is really in question of actually thinking about using Skills for Care, CQC have recommended them as well. So please do use the many amounts of things that they actually support on. Sometimes it can be such a much to look forward to, but if you speak to Ali or speak to us or go to a direct source, there's probably something there for everyone in Skills for Care. So thanks for that. Peter, I will pass it on to you because I know that time is running.
Okay, thanks, Ali. There's a huge amount there, and I think the Skills for Care website is a bit like the NICE website. Don't bother with the index. Use Google or talk to somebody at Skills for Care, and they'll point you in the right direction. There were 2 or 3 other things we were going to mention. The use of the Better Hiring Toolkit. It's on the LCaS website. And we've also had some questions about fake references. Now, we haven't got time to go into that, but there is some information, and we'll come back to it next time. The next virtual meeting will actually be on December the 12th. And we've got a Director of Employment Law from Citation coming along because people are not doing some of the key employment paperwork. And that's an obvious failure for either quality monitoring or CQC. And also there will be quite a lot about well-being and the use of employee assistance programs on that meeting as well. We've had some questions about getting DBSs. There have been delays with DBSs, but I checked through UCheck a couple of days ago, and their current average time to process, or the DBS service, The current average time taken to process all applications for enhanced is 11.8 days at the moment. If there's a problem, that problem is going to be down to the local police force. There are some delays. Quite a lot of police forces are in either special measures, etc. But do not be tempted to have staff working without DBS checks. It's not a good idea. Couple of other things quickly before we let you go. There's invitations to 2 meetings in the chat. We have a face-to-face meeting in November the 8th, Hammersmith and Fulham. It's a full-day meeting. There's quite a lot going on there. But it is for people who work in or are based in Hammersmith and Fulham. And we're always asked to get you to have your flu jabs, have your COVID jabs, to get your staff have flu jabs, have COVID jabs. That I think is all we can cram in today. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to Ian and also to Ali.
And also,
if you want to contact us, you know where you can contact us. Please do. And we look forward to seeing you either in November at Hammersmith or on the 12th of December.
Thank you, everyone. And also as well, just to chime in, we are doing a lot of work at the moment on the international workforce. So please do watch out for some of the things we'll be doing as providers. So you can share with us some of the information and questions you'd like to ask us and areas you'd like us to cover as well. There's a lot around funding, digital funding specifically. So do try and look out for that. CQC are really pushing forward for digitalization of records as well. So I think on that note, thank you very much for everyone joining us. Have a great rest of the day, and we will speak soon. Thank you.
Okay. Just one final point. I see John. Sorry, John, we didn't get a chance to run through training updates today. But if you want a local training provider that works with Workforce Development Fund, lots of experience, can sort it out for you, you've got the details for John Buttle at Social Works. Or if you haven't, let us know and we will sort that out for you. And enjoy the rest of your day, folks. Many thanks for coming. All the best.